Beyond words, our souls collide in the rhythm where dreams reside. Beyond words, we touch the sky.
Welcome to the Beyond Words Deep Dive Sessions, an inspiring exploration of the book Beyond Words by Marcia and John.
Hey everyone, gotta say, I love it when you send in stuff that really gets you thinking, and this excerpt from Beyond Words is seriously making me rethink how we communicate.
It's fascinating stuff.
Right, like we think it's just words, but this excerpt digs into how our past experiences shape not only what we say, but how we understand what we hear too.
It's way deeper than just the words themselves. Like the source material puts it this way: the only meaning of communication is the feedback it triggers. No feedback is also feedback. It's those aha moments, or even those awkward silences, that tell us so much more.
Okay, so unpack that a little. You're saying it's not just the message, but how it lands, how the other person sees it through their own lens, right?
Exactly. Think of it like this. We each have this framework built from our past, knowledge, you name it, it's what makes us, us. And that framework, it's like a filter for how we understand everything.
So like if I say casual Friday, someone who's never worked in an office is going to have a very different picture in their head than me.
Precisely. And to explain this, the excerpt uses this really cool visual they call "if the room of frames" metaphor.
All right, I'm listening. Paint me a picture.
Okay, imagine walking into a room, and it's filled with these picture frames, right? Each one, it represents some knowledge you have, a memory, a belief, anything important to you. That room, that's your perspective, your own unique framework.
Wow, some of my rooms would be pretty crowded.
Right. Now imagine trying to describe one of your pictures to someone, but they're in a totally different room with their own unique set of frames. You might be using the same words, but those words could be creating completely different images based on what's on their walls.
That's such a powerful image, and it makes total sense. It's not just the words, it's the whole context, the baggage we bring to the conversation.
And that's often where things get lost in translation. We think we're on the same page, but we're looking at totally different galleries.
Okay, I'm seeing how this room of frames idea could change how we approach communication completely. But how do we bridge that gap? How do we make sure our message ends up in the right room, so to speak?
That's where the excerpt takes a turn into learning about those different rooms, but also understanding the different stages of learning that come with truly getting communication.
Learning stages? Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, like any skill, we don't just wake up as expert communicators. There's a process, a journey. And understanding where we are on that journey and where other people are can make us more understanding and effective communicators. That's where the excerpt goes to the example of learning to drive.
Learning to drive. You have my attention. Everyone remembers their first driving lesson, right? So how does that connect to communication?
Think about it. When you first get behind the wheel, it's overwhelming, right? So much to think about. Gas, brakes, mirrors, signals. You don't even know what you don't know.
Oh, tell me about it. I think I stalled like 5 times before I even got out of my driveway.
That's what we call unconscious incompetence. You don't even know how much you don't know. But then, as you practice, you start to realize, oh, I need to turn the wheel more smoothly, or maybe I shouldn't slam on the brakes. You start to see what you need to work on.
Which can be kind of embarrassing, like, oh, I should probably know how to parallel park by now.
Exactly. That's conscious incompetence. You're aware of what you need to work on, and you're actively trying to improve.
So how does this tie in with the sugar cube surprise you mentioned before?
That's where it gets good. Imagine someone asks, what's your favorite drink? Sounds simple, right?
Totally. What could be more straightforward than that? But something tells me it's not so simple after all.
You got it. In the excerpt, the person pictures a nice cup of tea, even adds a sugar cube to it in their head. But the person listening, they pictured a glass of red wine. Can you imagine the confusion when that sugar cube gets added to the mental picture?
Oh, wow. Recipe for disaster right there. And it really highlights how even the simplest things can get lost in translation because of those rooms of frames we talked about. I'm seeing how recognizing these different stages in how we communicate could help us avoid those sugar cube surprise moments. But where do we go from that conscious incompetence? How do we level up our communication game?
Well, that's where things start to click, like with driving. You keep practicing, and eventually you're not thinking about each little step. You're just doing it smoothly. You might even feel, dare I say, kind of cool, confident.
I totally remember that feeling. It's like suddenly driving just clicks, and you're actually on a journey, not just trying to survive the experience.
Exactly. That's conscious competence. You can drive, but it still takes focus and effort.
So what's next? Do we ever get to a place where communication is effortless, like driving on autopilot?
We do. And that brings us to the final stage, unconscious competence. You've practiced so much that driving is second nature. You can chat, you can enjoy the view, you just do it. It's the same with communication.
That is fascinating. So are you saying we can reach a point where we're so good at communication we don't even have to think about it, where we just understand and connect with others on a deeper level naturally? Tell me more, because I need to know if I can add unconsciously competent communicator to my LinkedIn profile.
Well, it's not as simple as getting a badge, but we can definitely try to reach that level of mastery, yeah.
Okay, but how do we get there? What does unconscious competence look like in an actual conversation?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll dig into much deeper after a quick break.
So before the break, we were talking about reaching that unconscious competence in communication. It sounds kind of mystical. How do we even know if we've gotten there?
You know, that's a really good point. It's not like there's a finish line or anything. No flashing sign that says congratulations. It's more about noticing those subtle ways that you approach and move through conversations.
So what are some of the signs we're on the right track? What should we be looking for?
Well, think back to the driving analogy. When you're unconsciously competent at driving, you're not thinking about every single step. You just drive. It's the same with talking to people. You're not hung up on every word. You're present, engaged, and you can just listen and respond naturally.
Okay, that makes sense. But it's more than just being a natural communicator, right?
You're totally right. Unconscious competence isn't about being some kind of conversational robot. It's about deeply understanding how communication works. The little things in language, the nonverbals, really listening and being able to use all of that without even thinking about it in the flow of a conversation.
So it's kind of like that room of frames idea again. We're not just aware of our own room, but we can sense and adapt to the different rooms other people are bringing to the conversation too.
Exactly. You're developing a really strong sense of awareness and empathy. You start to pick up on those little cues that tell you what's going on in the other person's room, their thoughts, feelings, all of it.
That makes me think about those sugar cube surprise moments. At that unconscious competence level, could we stop those misunderstandings from happening in the first place?
It's not really about predicting the future, but more about being more mindful and deliberate in how we communicate. We get better at asking those clarifying questions, making sure we're on the same page, and changing up our style depending on who we're talking to and what we're trying to get across.
So it's less about avoiding misunderstandings completely and more about being able to handle them smoothly when they happen.
Exactly. It's about accepting that communication can be messy and unpredictable, but still building up our skills so we can be more effective and empathetic.
This is all making so much sense now, but it does make me wonder if we reach this stage of unconscious competence in one part of our lives, say, with close friends or family, does that automatically mean we're good to go in other situations, like at work or meeting new people, or do we have to work on it in different contexts?
That's a great question, and I think it's something a lot of people struggle with. It's true that we might find it easier to communicate in certain situations or with certain people.
Like, I'm way more comfortable joking around with my friends than I am giving a presentation at work. Those rooms of frames are definitely decorated differently.
Exactly. And that's okay. The key is to remember that communication is always changing. And just because we've reached a certain level in one area doesn't mean we can just switch off and expect it to work everywhere.
So even if we get to that unconscious competence with our closest people, we still need to keep those rooms of frames in mind as we deal with new people and new situations.
Absolutely. It's all about adapting, being open to learning, and understanding that being a good communicator is a lifelong thing, not a finish line.
I love that. It's not about being perfect, but about always trying to do better.
Exactly. And like any skill that's worth learning, it takes practice, patience, and being okay with making those mistakes like those sugar cube surprises and using them to grow.
So we've covered those stages of learning, but how do we know where we are on that path? Are there any obvious signs that can tell us what we're good at and what we need to work on?
That's where being self-aware is so important. It's about taking a step back and really looking at our own communication patterns. Do we talk too much or not enough? Do we really listen to understand, or are we just waiting for our turn to talk?
Those are good questions to ask ourselves. But self-reflection is hard. It's like trying to see your own blind spots. Are there any tips or techniques to help us get a clearer picture of how we communicate?
Absolutely. One of the best things you could do is ask for feedback from others. Sometimes the people closest to us can see things about our communication style that we don't even notice, both good and bad.
Okay, that makes sense. But I can already hear people saying, ask for feedback. What if they say something I don't want to hear? It can be scary to put ourselves out there like that. Any advice on how to approach those conversations bravely and with an open mind?
You're right, it can feel really vulnerable to ask for feedback, especially about something as personal as communication. But it's important to remember that most people aren't trying to be mean or critical. They're offering their perspective because they care about us and want to see us succeed. And that's actually a perfect example of what we've been talking about today. It all comes back to those rooms of frames. When we approach these conversations with curiosity and a willingness to learn, we're signaling that we're open to seeing things from a different angle, even if it's not always easy or comfortable. Remember, feedback is a gift, even when it's wrapped in a package we might not initially love.
I like that feedback is a gift. It's true, even if it's hard to hear sometimes, it's an opportunity to grow.
Exactly. And, the way we respond to feedback is just as important as the feedback itself. If we get defensive or shut down, we're missing out on a chance to learn and strengthen those communication muscles. But if we can approach it with curiosity, humility, and a sense of humor, we might be surprised by what we discover about ourselves and our relationships.
That's such a great point. So how can we get better at receiving feedback even when it's tough to hear? What are some practical things we can do to make those conversations more productive and less scary?
Well, one thing that's really helpful is to start by setting the stage for a positive and supportive conversation. Instead of just springing it on someone out of the blue, maybe you could say something like, "Hey, I'm trying to work on my communication skills, and I was wondering if you'd be willing to give me some feedback on how I'm doing." This lets the other person know that you value their opinion and that you're coming from a place of genuine self-improvement.
That's a great tip. And it also gives the other person a heads up so they can gather their thoughts and be more prepared to offer constructive feedback.
Exactly. It's all about creating a safe and supportive space for open and honest communication. And when you do get feedback, whether it's positive or negative, try to really listen and absorb what the person is saying without interrupting or getting defensive. Remember, their feedback is just their perspective. It's not the absolute truth about who you are as a person.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to take feedback personally, but it's important to remember that it's just information, and we get to choose how we use it.
Exactly. And sometimes the most valuable feedback is the kind that challenges our assumptions and helps us see ourselves in a new light. So be brave, ask for feedback, and be open to what you might learn about yourself and your communication style.
Such great advice. And, it strikes me that this whole idea of feedback isn't just limited to those formal conversations where we're specifically asking for it. It's happening all the time in our everyday interactions, isn't it?
You're absolutely right. Every conversation, every interaction is an opportunity to receive feedback, even if it's subtle. Paying attention to those subtle cues, body language, tone of voice, facial expressions, can give us valuable insights into how our message is landing and whether we need to adjust our approach.
It's like that old saying, you can't unring a bell. Once we say something, it's out there, and we can't take it back. But we can learn to be more mindful of the impact of our words and actions, and to use that feedback to become more skillful communicators.
Precisely. It's about taking responsibility for the energy we bring to our interactions and recognizing that even small adjustments in our communication style can make a big difference.
So we've talked about the importance of feedback, but what about those times when we're the ones giving feedback? Any advice on how to offer constructive criticism in a way that's helpful, not hurtful?
It's a whole other deep dive. But since we're on the topic, I think the most important thing to remember is that feedback should always be given with kindness and respect.
Absolutely. Even if we disagree with someone, we can still express our thoughts and feelings in a way that's respectful and considerate.
You got it. And I think that's a great place to leave it for today. We've covered a lot of ground, from the importance of active listening and nonverbal communication to the power of feedback and the challenges of navigating those sugar cube surprise moments. But most importantly, I hope our listeners walk away from this deep dive feeling empowered to approach their conversations with more awareness, empathy, and intention. Remember, communication is a journey, not a destination. And every interaction is an opportunity to learn, grow, and connect more deeply with the world around us.
Beautifully said. And for our amazing listeners who are ready to start decorating their own rooms of frames and navigating those sugar cube surprises with confidence, we've got you covered. Be sure to check out the show notes for some great resources to help you on your communication journey. Until next time, happy communicating, everyone. You know what's so cool about this? This whole deep dive, it's like giving us this new way to see things.
Yeah.
Not just to understand other people better, but to understand ourselves too, you know?
I like that, a new way to see things. And yeah, it's about figuring ourselves out just as much as it is about connecting with everyone else, for sure.
Totally. Because, like, if we can take a step back and say, hey, maybe I'm not always as clear as I think I am, or maybe I need to double check that people are getting what I'm saying, that's already huge.
It is. It's huge. And the excerpt, it really emphasizes this whole thing about listening being just as important as being a good talker.
Right.
Sometimes the best thing you can do is ask a really good question.
So true. Instead of assuming we know what someone means, we can be like, hey, can you tell me more about what you mean by that? Or just so I'm clear, are you saying? It's like approaching every conversation wanting to actually learn something.
And here's the really interesting part. Remember those rooms of frames?
Yeah.
When we go into conversations with that open mind, that curiosity, it's like we're saying, come on in, let's share our perspectives. It helps us connect those different worlds we live in.
Whoa. So by acknowledging that we all have those different rooms, we're making space for empathy and understanding right off the bat.
Exactly. We're saying, hey, we might not always agree, but let's try to understand each other.
I love that. See, heart to heart, that's what it's all about, right? Finding that connection, that shared human experience, even when we're different.
Exactly. And that's what makes communication so powerful. When it's done right, it can do so much.
Yeah.
You know, break down walls, build relationships, all those things that make life richer.
We've covered so much in this deep dive. Rooms of frames, sugar cube moments, even driving like a pro communicator. What's the one big thing you hope people take away from this?
You know, there's one thing to remember. It's that getting good at communicating is a journey, not a destination. It's about being present, curious, and embracing those aha moments. And yeah, even those sugar cube surprises, because they help us learn and grow.
So well said. It's a constant process of learning and changing how we communicate throughout our lives.
For sure.
And for everyone listening who's ready to start decorating their own room of frames and handling those communication curveballs, we've got your back. Check out our show notes for some awesome resources to help you on your journey. Until next time, happy communicating.
Thank you for listening. Give us a like and share your comments. Order the book via the link in the comments. Stay tuned for more.
Beyond words, our souls collide in the rhythm where dreams reside.